New York City mayoral candidates will face off in a final debate before Election Day. Joining us to discuss is Brianna Lyman, elections correspondent for the Federalist and Claremont Institute Publius Fellow. And we have Mike Leon, NTD News contributor and host of the Can We Please Talk podcast. So Mike, Brianna, welcome. Thank you guys for joining us today. I'll start with you, Brianna. Can you tell us what you're going to be watching for in this debate?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how Cuomo handles Mamdani's slick talking. You know, one of the biggest issues for Cuomo right now is that Mamdani has done a really great job on the ground campaigning, reaching low propensity young progressives. Cuomo has not gotten out enough to do that. So I think what tonight's going to be about is whether or not Cuomo can reach those same young progressives and convince them in, an hour or two that he's more qualified than Mamdani, someone that these people may have actually met on the street or heard from more directly this campaign cycle.
So, Mike, what about you?
Brianna's right. First off, good to see you guys on this afternoon. And Cuomo can't do it. Just to answer Brianna's overarching question, I think that's going to be one of the big watches tonight because this campaign really boils down to, and it's being over magnified, let's be honest, it's a mayoral race. I know it's one of the biggest cities in the union, but it really boils down to an experienced person who has scandal, who, in Marjorie Taylor Greene's own words, how could Republicans even get behind Cuomo when the nursing home scandal that happened throughout the COVID pandemic? But he does have experience leading the state at the gubernatorial level versus, like Brianna just said, somebody who walked the entire length of Manhattan, somebody that has met with a lot of young voters and is turning out voters in different waves and blocks. And not only low propensity, but I would say other folks that have been disenfranchised, marginalized throughout the years. And then you have Curtis Sliwa, who's just sitting there as a third candidate, who even President Trump, in his own words, has said is not a serious candidate, and he's siphoning off a good portion of this base. So I'm interested to see how the debate plays out tonight and how all three of them continue to explain a little bit more about their policy positions, especially Zoran on some of these ideas that he has for New York City.
So, Brianna, Mike said earlier that perhaps this is over magnified. How much of an impact will this last debate have on voters who choose on November 4th?
Yeah, I do think Mike is right to a degree that this entire election has been, over magnified, but it's being over magnified because we're seeing someone who has won a, Democratic nomination by being an outward socialist, right? This is a self-proclaimed socialist. He's a Marxist, and he now will be the mayor of New York, or America's greatest city. I do think that what's important to remember here is the New York Post came out with a poll, I believe it was this week, and they found that while Sliwa is in the race, Cuomo basically has no chance. If Sliwa was to drop out, I think Cuomo trails Mamdani by about 4 points. But what's more interesting is I think 78% of voters who are undecided are 55 or older. 55 or older are most likely not going to vote for Mamdani. They would likely split for Cuomo or Sliwa, which is why Sliwa getting out of this race would actually mean that Cuomo has a legitimate chance, right? Because you make it a binary choice, voters have to choose. Do they want a young radical socialist, or do they want someone who, yes, to Mike's point, had a horrible track record, the last few years of his term in office, but otherwise he was pretty popular among Democrats.
So, Mike, what do you think here? Brianna pointed to the polls, and I'm sure Sliwa saw them too. Why is he saying that under no circumstance he's going to drop out?
Well, because it's America, and we should put it up to the ballots, right? Don, I work at the Free and Equal Elections Foundation, right? More voices, more choices is our tagline. So we want to see more people actually be a part of the race and actually the democratic process take place. Brianna's not wrong about the math. I think we can all argue about whether or not polling and the snapshot in time that it does encapsulate is going to be accurate come November 4th on election night, right? Who knows if all of those voters would actually turn out for Cuomo or if they would stay home, right? We've seen that in other elections. So we truly don't know. It's an unknown, but it does make sense if you take a snapshot in time of a poll. I agree with Sliwa about not dropping out. I think this is actually one of the years where, to the president's credit and what he said, that if you had an actual Republican candidate that, like a Sliwa, has a connotation in New York City as not being a serious politician. He's just one of the guys. He was a guardian angel for a long time. He's never held any type of office at any type of city or any other level in New York City, but he's always been around the throes of New York politics. But if you had a serious Republican candidate that is running a little bit more on the president's platform, you could potentially have somebody that would unseat Andrew Cuomo. He wouldn't even have a chance in the independent lane, but for some reason, the Republican candidate is seen as the third party independent in the New York City mayor's race. So I don't know. I agree with Sliwa about not dropping out, not because of the siphoning of votes. I agree that you put it up for the ballot and let's see how it shakes out come November 4th.
So, Brianna, how are you looking at the situation where Sliwa is saying he won't drop out? He's saying he's even gotten monetary incentives to do so.
I got to be honest, I respect that Sliwa has strong convictions. I do think out of all the candidates, he would make the best mayor for New York City, but the math just isn't there. And if Sliwa loves New York City the way I do think he does, then he has to put his own political ambitions aside and look at the math and say, there is literally no path for victory for me forward. So do I want to watch New York City fall into the hands of a radical socialist, or do I want to give New York City a fighting chance? And I understand that voters should have the option to choose between all three candidates. However, there are a lot of split voters who say, well, I'm going to screw, Cuomo because I like Sliwa, but I hate Zohran Mamdani, not realizing that a vote for Sliwa ultimately is a vote for Mamdani. So I do think that given that we're in crunch time, it's actually a little bit more beneficial to help voters have that binary choice. And I really do hope that Sliwa changes his mind.
So, Mike, I want to pull on the thread that you brought up earlier that perhaps this race is over magnified. Why do you think that is exactly? Why do you think this race looks to be holding more national significance than previous races?
Well, there's a couple of things. Brianna knows this as well. I mean, it's 2025. It's an off year, right? We've got a couple of gubernatorial races. We've got some AG races that are happening in Virginia. And then we have the biggest city arguably in the world having its mayoral race. And we have, like Brianna mentioned, a Democrat that was once popular, that everybody thought would be the future potentially of the party during those pressers back in 2020 in Andrew Cuomo, versus somebody who has been an assemblyman and has risen in this meteoric rise in the Democratic Party, which doesn't even want him to be a part of the Democratic Party. If you just look at some of the representatives in New York who haven't even endorsed him, which, by the way, I think endorsements are, as useful as the waste paper basket. I'm about to throw some paper in later. Those don't matter, but he's not even being endorsed by some of those people in the Democratic Party. So you've got this huge snowball and hurricane effect that's happening right now. It's 2025. There's a new administration in DC, and that administration is taking it out a little bit on some of the blue cities. This is the biggest blue city. The potential to elect a mayor who himself has said he's a democratic socialist, something that New York City has not had maybe since David Dinkins back in the 90s, who was kind of on that fringe line. And again, we're in a down year. It's not 2026. We don't have all the House and Senate races happening right now. So it's getting a little over magnified because this is one of the big ones, including New Jersey's gubernatorial race and Virginia, that will, as we get a little bit closer, start to get over magnified as well. But we just don't have that many races right now. And there's a zoom out of this in terms of, if Mamdani wins, will the Democrats actually first work with him, endorse him, but then also, what does the future of the party look like? Does it look like more like Zohran Mamdani, or does it return back to the Chuck Schumers of the world, which have gotten us into the minority?
So, Brianna, what do you think about that? This idea about whether Mamdani could become the future of the Democratic Party if he wins?
Yeah, I think that this is an opportunity for Democratic leadership, so Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, to actually reject far-left candidates like Zohran Mamdani that have really alienated voters across the country. You go back to November 2024, not only did Donald Trump win the popular vote in the Electoral College, but the entire country shifted right, which means that there is no mandate for Democrats to, for some reason, go the opposite direction. So I think that if Schumer and Jeffries and other political leadership had any political instinct left, they would have used this as an opportunity to reject Mamdani types and to, unfortunately, embrace Cuomo, who is part of that old guard of the Democratic Party. I think Tom Suozzi is one of the only Democrats from New York that has, openly said, I'm not going to support Mamdani. He has it right because he understands, he represents a rather purple district. He understands that average Americans, even if they're Democrats, they don't subscribe to socialism. They want a classic, 1990s Democrat.
All right, Mike, we're just about out of time here. Broadly speaking, what do you think NYC voters are looking for in this election?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that, right? The former New York City kid himself, Don. So, I was talking to a Jewish friend of mine that lives up in Riverside, and I asked him this, and we didn't even get into the Jewish voters and that voter block, but he said this Mamdani race is about a battle of progressive Jews that like him versus older Jewish folks that have money that realize he could potentially ruin the city. And when you think about that dynamic, it goes back to the way the primaries played out, where you saw people on the Upper East Side, Cuomo won by +4, whereas people in Prospect Heights, Crown Heights tend to be poorer communities, and Mamdani won those by like +20, +30 percentage points, right? So that's going to be the battle. The battle is going to be about affordability. Do we want to try something different in New York City? We can't afford to live here. Everything's too expensive. This is one of the most expensive states in the union, the second highest state tax in the union. What are we going to do about the things in New York City that make it more affordable to actually live here so that Mike Leon doesn't actually leave New York City and live in Florida like he does now with his family? And that is the problem. Mamdani's talking about that. He has a grassroots campaign about that. Cuomo has done things legislatively at the gubernatorial level, but he's not without scandal. And Marjorie Taylor Greene's old words, how can you forget about the scandal and elect somebody like that?
All right, Brianna, if you have any final thoughts real quick.
No, I think Mike is spot on. I think you might see a mass exodus of New Yorkers to Florida. I might be following Mike down there soon if Mamdani definitely wins.
All right, well, it's been a good conversation today. Brianna, Mike, thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.